Hello and welcome to episode 28 of the Ecuador Insider Podcast. I'm Jesse Bayer, joined as always by my business partner, Darnell Dunn. We have, as promised, an expert on immigration law and specifically getting visas for foreigners here with us tonight, who we'll introduce momentarily. I'm very excited about that. Today is Friday, February 17th. I'm coming from you from Loja, Ecuador. Darnell and our guest as well are coming to you from Cuenca. We have been in the middle of just an amazing stretch of weather here in Loja. Super happy about that. Sunny days, warm days. That's been awesome. Let me just introduce who we are very quickly, and then we'll get to our guest and get to a lot of great materials today on the upcoming election, the political situation in Ecuador, what that means for the country going forward, both opportunities and risks, as well as a detailed look at the new immigration law. So we are Abundant Living Ecuador. We're a real estate and relocation services firm based out of Loja, Cuenca now as well. We cover much of southern Ecuador and have branched out as well into some of the north and on the coast. You can reach us or you can see us on our website at abecuador.com. From the U.S. and Canada, you can call us on our toll-free line at 888-999-0948. Email us at info@abecuador.com, and of course, check us out on YouTube, Facebook, etc. So we are joined tonight by Maite Duran, and she is the founder of GringoVisas, which is a very respected service out of Cuenca that's helped lots and lots of foreigners successfully move to Ecuador. I'll go ahead and just read her bio here off of her website to introduce her, and we'll get into the show. Maite Duran is the founder of GringoVisas. She was born in Ecuador and moved to the U.S. as a teenager, where she attended and graduated high school and college. After a successful career in real estate and finance, she returned to Ecuador to be closer to her family. Maite began working for a company in Cuenca that offered relocation services and quickly became their visa specialist, recognizing the growing need for a service that not only specialized in visas, but could also deliver the level of customer service that expats expect. Maite founded GringoVisas. She opened her Cuenca headquarters with a multilingual team, including legal counsel. In Quito, the Ecuadorian capital, she positioned her staff near the immigration headquarters to benefit clients. And finally, due to the increasing number of American expats relocating to Ecuador, she opened a fully staffed office in the United States. Over the years, she has successfully processed all types of visas for hundreds of expats from around the world. So Maite, thank you so much for joining us tonight. How are you?
Hi, very good. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah, well, we're psyched to get you on the line. A lot of people have a lot of confusion and a lot of questions about this immigration law that was recently passed. From everything we can get our hands on ourselves, it seems like some of the rules are still being written, and I know they had sort of a freeze on visas there for a minute. I don't know if that's still going on. Sort of a confusing time, so we're hoping you can clear some of that up for us tonight. So let's jump right into that. Why don't you, if you would, for our listeners, if you could just kind of give somewhat of an overview of some of the changes that have taken place. I know there's some temporary visa options now and a few other changes that have taken place. What are the changes that stand out to you with the new immigration law?
Absolutely. There's a lot of questions out there because of this new laws. But I have to say, I believe these changes are positive because we needed a new system in order to function better. A lot of things are also staying the same. I think they changed things that needed to be changed. Like one of them is that, you can still enter the country with a 90-day visa, but then this visa can be extended into another additional 3 months. And then you can apply for a special visa if you like to stay here in the country for a year. In the past, you couldn't stay a year as a tourist. Now you can. With this 90-day visa, then the additional 90 days, and this special visa for another 6 months.
Okay.
Of course,
Maite, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We had just done a sound check prior to jumping on the recording, and everything sounded really good. I'm getting a lot of interference on your line. Let's try something and see if it helps. Darnell, let's me and you mute out while she's talking and see if that has any effect on it, because it's a little, I don't know if you're getting that same static, Darnell, on your end, but... Yeah, you are. Okay. So let's both hit mute, and then Maite will let you finish talking, and hopefully that clears it up.
Oh, okay. I hope you can hear me better now. I also lowered the volume on my end.
Yes, actually, I think that was it.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So, like I said, now people can stay in Ecuador for up to 12 months as a tourist. This visa can only be obtained once every 5 years. So once they decided that they don't want to be tourists anymore and they want to become residents of Ecuador, they can go ahead and apply for a temporary visa called a temporary permanent residency visa. And it looks like they're doing kind of alike of what they have in the US. When you apply for a visa, they don't give you a permanent residency visa automatically. They first give you a temporary visa. And of course, after 2 years, after they've seen that you've been a good citizen, that you paid your taxes, that you haven't committed any crimes, then you can automatically apply into a permanent residency visa, which is the case of the new law here in Ecuador as well. And a lot of people are concerned of, the documents that are going to be needed 21 months after they have been a temporary resident. Well, at that time, they're not going to want the FBI report or the state report from the US. They will want an Ecuadorian police report, which can be easily obtained online, and then it's certified by the court in Ecuador. So I don't see like a big hit on that. It's not going to be a major thing. We don't know the fees. We are hoping that the fees stay the same because they were changed last year. They had an increase on the fees last year. So again, once a temporary resident at the end of 21 months, they can go ahead and apply for the permanent residency. But one of the major changes I see is that to exceed the time that you're allowed to be out of Ecuador.
Hey, Maite, we were doing great there with the sound, and then it came back in a little bit. Could you try maybe lowering your volume slightly more? It seemed to help last time.
Can you hear me better now?
Yep, a little. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Should I don't know if it's me or should I speak louder?
No, I think it's just the line, and just now when you spoke, it sounded better. So please continue.
Okay. All right. So now the big changes are the ones that when you leave the country for more than 90 days. In the past, when you were a permanent resident, if you left the country for more than 90 days, you automatically lost your visa. And there were no exceptions made. Now that has changed. If for any reason you leave the country for more than 90 days, the first year, you have to pay a fine of $1,125, which is equal to 3 minimum salaries. So if you do that the first time, then if you do that the second year, you will also have to pay. Now, if you exceed year number 3, however, you can be out of the country for 180 days instead of 90 days. If you in fact exceed the 180 days, you will have to pay a fine for $1,500. However, if you do that, if you exceeded it one more time, you will lose your visa automatically after that.
Okay. So let me just see if I have this right. So the new law says that first you have to apply for a temporary resident visa. That's a 2-year visa. And then you can apply for the permanent residency visa. You don't need the police report from your country of origin the second time around. And your travel restrictions are basically the same, but now there's a fine involved. You can basically pay to travel, it sounds like, for the first 2 years.
Correct. If you exceed the time.
Right.
So it's going to be 90 days for the first year while you are a temporary resident, 90 days for the second year. But then year number 3, after you have become a permanent resident, then you can be out of the country for 180 days each year. Mm-hmm. But if you exceed those 180 days, which is pretty much half year here, you're anywhere you like. But if you exceed those, the fine will be $1,500. Mm-hmm. $1,500. So now, but then another time, like it'll be time number 4, where you have exceeded the days out of the country, they will not charge you a fine, you will lose your visa.
Okay, so 4 strikes, you're out in this case.
Yes.
Okay, very good. And I assume that none of these laws affect people who are already have a visa or already in the process, have already started the paperwork. Is that correct?
That's correct. The changes are going to be applied to new applicants. And so anybody that had the visa before, they're not going to be affected. But the laws have not been written yet. They still have 120 days to do it. Mm-hmm. We think that they're going to come out soon, but once they come up with these laws, we feel that even for permanent resident visas, they're going to be somewhat obligated to buy insurance.
Great. Well, that was my next question. So it sounds like the rules aren't clear on that yet, but some sort of health insurance are going to be needed to. Is that for tourists as well, do you think, or is that only for if you're applying for a visa?
The law is not so clear right now. What we have assumed with the team of lawyers that I have working with me is that to come into the country at first, they will want traveler's insurance. Mm-hmm. If you're an Ecuadorian and you're traveling to, let's say, Europe, mm-hmm. We as a tourist, we have to buy traveler's insurance. And it looks like they want to implement the same here in Ecuador. But like I said, it's not written yet. So we are assuming that that's what they will want. Because without a cedula, you can buy government insurance.
Okay. And my understanding as well is that they've expanded or they've increased, the amount of time you can come to Ecuador as a tourist without applying for an extension from 3 months to 6 months. Is that accurate?
Well, as a tourist, you can come in for 3 months, which is 90 days, and then you can extend those for another 90 days.
Okay,
At the end of those 90 days, pretty much 180 days, then you can apply for an additional 180 days. So it has increased the time that you can be a tourist.
Okay, so it's still 3 months, but then you can get a 3-month extension and then a 6-month extension.
Correct.
Got it. Darnell, you got questions on the visa?
Yes. Yeah, I do. Well, I shouldn't say I do. I did. You took my question about the travel insurance, but it sounds to me, and I just want to get your opinion on this, Maite, that it sounds to me as though for people who are, Jesse and I being people who, both gotten our visas, and, me personally with some help from you, the travel, it just seems to me from, looking at the old law that we got our visas under versus the new one, it seems like there's less travel restrictions. Not having to go to your country of origin to get a police report is really beneficial and a lot less headaches. And it just seems like there's more flexibility with the fines as opposed to under the old system where you had to just give up your visa if you didn't follow through with some of the travel restrictions. Is that your understanding of it? What are your thoughts around that?
I think it's going to be beneficial because based on my experience, I had a few clients that had to leave the country for many different reasons. One of them being health issues, and they had to exceed the 90 days. They were looking to pay a fine and not having to start all over again. And before, there were no exceptions made. So now they're going to have this option of paying the fine, and they can continue on with being residents of Ecuador.
Great. And another question I had for you with respect to visas. In your business, what kind of visas are you doing the most of? What kind of trends are you seeing with people coming to Ecuador? Talk to us a little bit about that, please.
One of the best options we find in our office is that it's better to have the visa issue in the U.S. before you relocate to Ecuador, especially if you're going to have dependents added to your visa or if you're going to ship a container, or even to save money on not having to buy a round-trip ticket. So, for example, if you're looking to relocate within the next 6 months, it gives us enough time to have the visa issue in the U.S. Now, when you come into the country, within a week or so, you can get your cedula, and the cedula will get you the government insurance. So if for any reason you're coming in as a tourist at first, you have to buy this insurance. But if you're coming in as a resident, within a week of arrival, you can get your health insurance. Then you will save money. You will also save time and headaches of going to the immigration office and traveling here and there, and ship your container duty free. So one of our best advice is to, if you know you're moving in the next 6 months or even a year, to have the visa issue in your home country. The beauty about this visa is that it's not a time limit for you to come into Ecuador after your visa is issued. So you can have your visa issue and wait, 6 months before you move to Ecuador. In a few months ago, they changed, almost a year ago, they changed this law where you cannot add any dependents to your visa unless you had a cedula. And just imagine you're coming to apply for your visa in Ecuador and then add your dependents later on. This will mean that your dependents are gonna not have a visa or a cedula for a long time, because they first have to wait for your approval, and then only after you have your visa, you can apply for dependents. So having it again issue in the US will avoid this extended time of waiting.
Great. Hey,
as far as the most popular visas, they're still the same. You can still get a pension visa, and the numbers haven't changed. You can still get an investor's visa with depositing the money in a CD account. And of course, the professional visa is still active.
Very good. That was my next question. Great. I think we've covered that. Anything else, guys, on the visa before we move on?
Yeah, one last question, Jesse. So Maite, with that recommendation about getting the visa in your home country before arriving to Ecuador, how has the new legislation changed that? For example, can someone get a cedula if they are a temporary resident as opposed to a permanent resident? How does it work? Or is that still being worked out?
It's getting cut off, but the cable visas, meaning the visas that are going to be issued in the US, that has not changed. It's still the same. Meaning, of course, they're going to be applied to the same laws, but the visa can, in fact, still be issued in your home country.
Yeah, Darnell, you were cutting in and out a little bit on that question. Did she get at what you were asking?
Yeah. Well, let me just ask it again, just to be sure.
Now you're loud and clear.
Okay, great. So my question was, can someone still get a cedula issued to them if they only have a temporary visa? How does that work with getting health insurance and bringing a shipping container into Ecuador, or are those things still being written?
We have some information that it's still going to be the same, meaning they can still get the cedula and they can still get health insurance. Now, the only thing is that if the visa doesn't get renewed or doesn't become a permanent, then they have to give up the cedula or give back the cedula. But if they continue, the number will not change. The visa and the cedula will just continue its course.
Okay,
so
that's great.
The answer is yes. You can get health insurance with the temporary visa.
And Darnell, of course, you're referring to the state option health insurance when you're asking that question, correct?
And, as well as the state.
Yes.
And it looks like.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And this is not clear for people traveling in as tourists. Right now, in order to purchase health insurance, you have to have a cedula. But who knows? That might even change. You can purchase, maybe they put it so you can purchase government health insurance without having to have a cedula. We don't know exactly what the law is going to say about that.
And Maite, you mentioned a number of days they had to write all the rules. Was that 120, did you say?
120 days from, yes,
When they passed the law.
February 6th.
Yeah.
So, and they mentioned that they're going to have maybe even a little bit extra to make sure they comply with the visas that they had pending and to have everything in order, because to them, to the ministry, this is a major change. These are significant changes for them.
And so during those 4 months or so, while they're sorting out the rules, are the old rules in effect, or is that somewhat unclear?
It is somewhat unclear, but we have at least updated from them that what we submitted before, it's going to be subject to the old rule.
Right, what's already in.
Yes, I think next week we're going to know more, because this week they kind of shut down the applications, taking in the applications to work out the details of this new law.
The joys of bureaucracy.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Anything else on visas?
That's it for me, Jesse.
Very good. All right. Well, as we've talked about fairly extensively on the last couple of shows, we are in election season here in Ecuador. They just shut down campaigning. Was it yesterday? Was the last day that you could campaign, I believe. So we're now in sort of a quiet period until Sunday, when we have national elections. There's 3, and some would argue 4 potential people who are, serious candidates to be elected. To recap that for people, that's Lenin Moreno, who is the Alianza País party, the candidate, the party of Rafael Correa. There is Guillermo Lasso, who's a banker and more from the right, as well as Cynthia Viteri, who also is of a similar political leaning. And then Paco Moncayo, who I've heard varying opinions on his sort of political leanings, everything from right to left, but my understanding is a little more left than right, but perhaps you can clear that up for us. But we have elections again on Sunday. We also are in a state mandated dry season. We have prohibition here in Ecuador for the next few days through Sunday. You can't buy booze. So again, election coming up, a lot on the line, very different directions that the country will go in should, for example, Moreno get elected or Lasso get elected. I've heard political analysis ranging from Moreno is likely to be elected to, Moreno is unlikely to be elected. So a lot of opinions out there. The polls seem to have Moreno in the 30s for the most part, followed by Lasso in the high teens or low 20s, followed generally by Viteri a little bit behind him, and then Moncayo bringing up the rear. I've seen some have him around 8% or so. So interesting time. Should Moreno not get, Moreno's the likely only candidate who could achieve this status. Should he not get either 50% of the vote or 40% of the vote with a 10-point lead over the second place candidate, we'll go to a runoff election on April 2nd. I think a lot of people think that that's pretty likely. So that's where we're at. And we've talked about this stuff a lot. I'm not going to recap too much, but again, we've had an interesting time in Ecuador under Correa's rule. Obviously, lots of good things that have come out of that, but also very heavy taxes, very heavy regulations, really a difficult business climate, and really a difficult climate for the private sector, period. So, let's get into that a little bit. Why don't we just start with, what are your general thoughts on the election? What do you think maybe is going to happen? What would you like to see happen? And then we'll kind of get into some of the ramifications of that.
Oh, absolutely. President Correa did a lot of great things, but he's been in power for 10 years. So I believe changes are coming to Ecuador. I hope changes are coming to Ecuador. There's the historian in Ecuador, Simón Bolívar. He said at one point that there's nothing more dangerous than to give power to a person for a longer period of times. In this case, President Correa has already been in power for 10 years. So I think it's time for a change. So I hope to see that, but I'm not against any of them. I know Lasso is a good candidate, and I know they've been saying a lot about him for being a banker. And there's a lot of things that they're putting against him, but nothing has been proven. if in fact something has been proven against him, he will be in jail by now. But that has not happened. And then also Cynthia. Cynthia is, I have, again, like nothing against her, but hopefully she's the second one also. And I mean, my overall thing is to see a new person. We had a lot of good things, like I said, and it's time for a change.
I wanted to ask you about that. I'm getting a little ahead of myself perhaps, but since you brought it up, can you clarify for me and for our listeners, what was Lasso's role during dollarization, the collapse of the Sucre and subsequent dollarization that has gotten people so upset?
During March of 1999, when this feriado bancario happened, he was the Ministry of Ministry. He was in charge of the finances of Ecuador. And he had family members that were owners of the banks. But he was involved being a family member, and he was also the Ministry of Economics here in Ecuador. But again, nothing was proving to him that he did something wrong. The fact that he was a ministry at that time doesn't make him, he should not take the blame for what happened. Okay. It was the whole economy, it was the president, it was many, many different things. Okay. And many different factors on why that happened.
So then if I have, and I'll just kind of recap a little bit of this history for people, and please correct me on anything that I say wrong. I'm not from here. I have not studied this in any great detail. You know the history much better than I do. But so, 2000, interest rates are through the roof on the Sucre, obviously meaning that it's in trouble. They call a bank holiday. I guess one day turned into 2 days, turned into 3 days, and then ended up sometime, I think, early on the following week, basically announcing sort of all in one shot that, the Sucre is going down. And then I don't know if it was a couple days later or exactly the timing, but that Ecuador is going to dollarize. And so it sounds like to me what you're saying is that the charges against Lasso is sort of that he had inside information on that, and he sort of maybe perhaps kept that quiet, and then everything sort of just happened, and obviously Ecuadorians lost a huge amount of wealth in that transfer over from Sucres to the new valuation of how many dollars you're going to get for the Sucres you currently held in the various banks at that time. Is that more or less accurate?
I think he got a lot more involved in it because of the fact that he had family members that were bankers.
Right.
And that's kind of where the blame began from my point of view. But maybe there was nothing he could have done because the dollar didn't happen from one to another. It was planned. Right. It took its course. It took months. And what happened with the money isn't that necessarily that the interest went up. Is that the money were frozen, so people couldn't take the money out of their bank accounts, couldn't take money out of their savings account. So if you had a certain amount of dollars, you go to the bank and the bank didn't give you money, and it was frozen there. And after some time, banks negotiated so they will give you a percentage of your money. Mm-hmm. But then at that time, when you were allowed to take the money out of the bank, it became dollars. So people that had a lot of money in our all currency, all of the sudden in dollars, it wasn't much. And that's where people lost a lot of money, and that's when a lot of immigrants left the country to go other places like the United States and Europe to look for better opportunities. Okay. It's people that had money and then all of a sudden they didn't have money. Ecuador lost more than $80 million.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, my understanding, just the point on interest rates was that what I've been told is that leading up to the period of time when it got to the point where it was hard to get your money out of the bank. Prior to that, I heard banks were paying, outrageously high percentages, for example, on deposits or on CDs, on pólizas. So that's just what I was referring to with the interest rate point.
Oh yeah, that was part of the problem also. So you're right, and that's when President Correa did very good on that. He would put a max on the amount of money that you can collect on interest, and they also in the past people would lend money to friends and family, and just make business out of lending money and collecting very high interest. All of that got regulated with President Correa.
Okay. D, what you got, man? Political.
I'm sorry?
Political.
The elections. Go ahead.
I mean, I think we've really talked about this a lot of the last couple of shows. But I definitely see the base case of, base case being what's reported is that, Moreno will win the first round, but it will have to go to a runoff. And I think at that point, one of the opposition candidates, which it looks like Lasso is really the front runner of, people will rally behind them, because it seems to me as though people in Ecuador really do want to change for all the reasons that Maite was bringing up. That after 10 years, not to mention that the president who's served, 10 years, 3 terms, who's rewritten the Constitution, also had a what do you call that? Not a referendum, but I guess a new clause added to the Constitution to abolish term limits. Mm-hmm. So, after 10 years and 3 terms, I think people look at everything that's happened, good and bad, and say, that's not really the direction that most people want to go in. So, I certainly think that, we'll have a new president here in Ecuador come May. And, I think that person will be Guillermo Lasso.
Putting you on the spot, Maite, if you had to call it today, who wins? Who's the next president of Ecuador?
Guillermo Lasso. I am part of his political party. As a matter of fact, when was it 2-3 years ago, the elections for the governor of Cuenca, I was one of I ran for an office. So I am with Guillermo.
Yeah. Well, you get no argument for me, certainly. I would very much like to see him win as well, for reasons, we've discussed. And just to sort of recap that for people, I think there's a lot of people out there sort of, maybe from the political left a little bit more who, maybe are looking at the election from a distance and sort of thinking to themselves, sort of putting it in these terms. Rafael Correa and his party have done so much good for infrastructure, for poverty. They've helped, with all sorts of things which we've gone over many times, and that the other direction would cut spending in those sorts of ways, and sort of increase the wealth gap, if you want to use a funny term that we use in the States. And sort of looking at it from that perspective. And while that's a perspective I certainly can understand, I just want to sort of give people a sense of, and you could, I'd be interested in hear from your business as well, how it's affected you. Just give people a sense of sort of how far things have gone in the direction of taxes and whatnot. At this point in Ecuador, and this is really maybe even more true here in Loja than it is in other places with the mayor that we have, but here in Ecuador, to do anything at this point, entrepreneurial or business-oriented, is extremely difficult. And it's not only the tax policy, which I think is fairly outrageous, but it's also the amount of permissions needed to do anything, and the amount of things that are outright prohibited, and also the time and money it takes to get permissions and those sorts of things issued. So the entrepreneur in Ecuador is really sort of inhibited in a way that I think people maybe coming from some countries that don't really have a sense of that couldn't even sort of have a context for. It's very, very difficult to be in the private sector right now in Ecuador under current tax and regulatory policy. And so whether, whatever side of sort of the political spectrum you come from, I think everybody would agree that, you need a functioning private sector for an economy to work, a country to function. And the way things are going in Ecuador under the current administration, it's sort of you're in bed with government and you're doing okay, or you're not, and it's extremely difficult to make a living. And I'd be interested just to hear from your perspective how sort of some of those taxes and regulatory policy has affected maybe your business, but also some of those things that you've seen, perhaps just observing it with other people.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Guillermo Lasso, he's a business owner. He knows how to create jobs, and I believe he's going to make the changes that we, the business owner, need. Because you're right, right now it's very difficult to even get a license to open up a business. You know, before you open, you want to close your business. That's the kind of way it is going right now. In licensing, and I understand that we need a lot of rules, but it takes forever as of now. So I hope that changes, even if Lasso doesn't win. I hope that changes with Lenin if he's going to be our next president.
Well, that brings up a very interesting question. Do you think that's on the table? Do you think that's a possibility that if Lenin, a lot of people have said this, I kind of don't buy it, but I'd be interested to hear your perspective. Do you think that Lenin Moreno actually could be a very different president policy-wise than Rafael Correa?
The same political party, and I mean, I hope he sees what President Correa didn't do correct, and he makes changes to be better and to do different than Correa. But you know, right now, Lenin Moreno and Lasso, one of the two are gonna win, I think. So my hope and our hope is that if he wins, in fact, he makes changes into what's not functioning correct. But again, he's on the same political party, so we'll have to see. Maybe Correa comes back after a little bit.
D, you want to jump in?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think you brought up a really good point, Jesse, about the people who may lean differently from either of the three of us, and some of the social programs that may be at risk. Et cetera, et cetera. And the thing that I look at, and I'd be the first person to recognize all the great things that have happened with the roads and the infrastructure, the bridges, the seaports, all of the things that Ecuador has done to really develop into what I would call, not a third world country by any stretch of the certainly not a first world country, but definitely somewhere in between. A lot of the roads that you'll find in Ecuador are better than roads that I drove on in the United States for years. So I think there has been a lot of, positive things that have happened in Ecuador in the last 10 years. At the same time, at what cost? Government, as a percentage of GDP is more than doubled over the last 10 years. And so you have a lot of social programs that people are talking about and concerned about that aren't sustainable anyway. The government is going out and borrowing money from China or the IMF, under different terms that, may not be in people's best interest long term. But it's almost like the idea of, we're going to do this to help people sort of trumps everything. How many schools can you build? How many hospitals can you build? That doesn't always make sense. And when you're spending other people's money to do good things, people, that also can distort incentives. And so that's why I'd like to see things different. And I have every reason to believe that they will be.
Yeah, I mean, when you start talking about 75% taxes on anything, I think you've crossed the line long ago.
I mean, how can you say to somebody, okay, after I think we've talked about the capital gains tax. That's one of the things that, certainly affects our business the most, but more than anything for you or me, or Maite for that matter, I think it's just something that ripples through the economy and makes it hard for anybody here to make a living. If the government says, well, this is what we have decided that it's fair for you to make, and everything beyond that, we keep 75 cents on the dollar because we used your money to invest in things that we wanted to invest in. And because you bought some property where a road goes by that we built with your tax dollars, we can take 75 cents on the dollar. I mean, that just stops making sense.
Yeah, it's outrageous. I think, too, there's a couple of points I just want to make about Correa's presidency. And again, I think, to your point, I don't take away from the things he's done well. We've covered that numerous times. There's no point to rehash it. He did them. It's true. The level of debt under Correa has increased dramatically. Ecuador is not high on the list of most indebted countries, debt to GDP, but it has quite a significant debt. There's also been, a lot of things that have happened that I think are really, really negative for the people he seems to want to appeal to the most, which are, the people less economically well off, etc. For example, and I believe this was done in the Constitution. In Ecuador, you do not own, as a landowner, you don't own anything under the soil, including the water. So you don't own the water on your land. If there's gold under your land, you don't own that. You don't even own the rocks under your land. I mean, you can't even, dig for gravel on your own land without getting permission. And part of that, what's happened as a result of that particular aspect of the law here, is that you can actually get mining concessions on other people's property because it's just a matter of getting permission from the government. It has nothing to do with ownership of the actual property. And, they're going in with the police and military, for example, close to where we are in Zamora province, etc., and, bulldozing people's houses as they kick them off their land because, mining companies have concessions that the people may be compensated for in some very small way. Like, for example, the government will pay out what they say that land is worth, what they have it valued at, which is not much, especially if you consider there's gold under the ground. So that has been part of his presidency as well. He's doing a lot of things people really elected him specifically to not do. For example, drill for oil in the Amazon. And at this point, much of Ecuador, I was looking at the map today, the government has a website for it. Much of Ecuador has various types of mining concessions. Much of the country already has mining concessions either for gold or for gravel or for metal. And, we're actually helping people now get mining concessions for their own land just to protect it, not necessarily to mine. Not that I have anything necessarily against mining per se. But I just, I'd like to make that point for people who kind of are supporters of Correa. And yes, he has done a lot of good. But a lot of those things that I think people who would support him would be really important issues to them, he's gone very much the other way on.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything to add to that, Maite?
Yeah, I agree with you. Correa has gone above of what he should have done, especially getting in so much debt with China, spending our money. The spending money is outrageous, especially on the public side. You have people working like 3 or 4 where there should be one person working. So he's appealing to the people that are not so well off here in Ecuador as far as being on the poor side, but also for all of the jobs that he's created, but too many of them is spending the money.
Yeah, right. They're government jobs.
Should not spend.
Yeah. Maite, I want to just jump back really quick into the election. There's a lot of talk in Ecuador about election fraud, voting fraud, reports of dead people voting, reports of, election fraud. Well, what's your thoughts on that? Is that a real thing? Is that a risk? What do you think about that?
I think it's definitely, I think to me at least, it's a real thing. People need to go vote because what they're saying is that they would vote for people that are not voting, or they're giving votes to the official 35 right now for people that are voting in blank or not giving it to any. Voting in blank means they're not giving the vote to anybody. They're just leaving it blank. And so what they will do is, there's at least what they're saying is that this vote will be account for the list 35.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. So that was actually going to be my next question. So yeah, so for example, a lot of people, say like because it's mandatory to vote in Ecuador, otherwise you get fined. So a lot of people,
$60 is the fine.
right? So a lot of people say, well, I don't need to vote in the first round. I'll wait till the second round. But potentially it sounds like some of those, or like you said, some people might go and vote maybe for local candidates and leave presidency blank. And I've heard this as well that it sounds like those votes maybe end up getting counted for the current administration's party, Alianza País, or 35-35. So you've heard that's your understanding.
That's my understanding too, and that's why they have been created controls. As at least Lasso has created people to conscience, but there's only so much they can do. We are in control, so we are the ones that we should go and vote and exercise our right.
Yeah, or in this case, exercise our obligation.
Well, you're right. We're obligated to do it.
Yeah.
Not like in the U.S.
Right. Hey, let me jump off topic for a second, but I know you do, you deal obviously with tons of foreigners. I think you dabble in real estate a bit as well, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
No, not real estate.
Not too much. Okay. What are you seeing? And if this is just not your expertise and you want to defer, you're welcome to do so. But what are you seeing in the real estate market or in the business market in general in Cuenca? And then I know that's where you sort of are based out of. Perhaps you have an idea also for the rest of the country. But what are your thoughts on prices? Perhaps whether it's rentals, whether it's homes or properties. As well as sort of the business climate there. What have you seen over the last couple of months? Obviously, the last couple of years have been really bad, both for business as well as real estate. We've seen an interesting uptick over the last couple of months. Things are like crazy right now with buyers and sellers. Tons of stuff coming on the market. I know obviously that's not your business, but what are you seeing just from sort of a bird's eye view of just talking to folks and being a business person in Cuenca with the business climate over the last few months specifically, and perhaps real estate, if you have any thoughts on that?
In Ecuador, at least in Cuenca, where I live, the properties are always, the market is always good. Not necessarily, there's where right now you're saying it's really crazy, people are buying, people are selling, but we have times and we have times. Mm-hmm. And the properties don't necessarily go down in value like they did in the US back in 2006. So you're never gonna buy a property in Cuenca for an underprice. That's what I see, and I don't think it has declined. And it's something I see a lot of more constructions going up, especially for buildings. That's where people like to live lately, to avoid a lot of things with debts and overall maintenance of the houses.
Okay. Darnell, I think, we've covered a lot of what I wanted to cover. Do you have some things you want to get to before we give Maite some time to talk about what she does and get out of here?
I really would like to give her the time to be able to chat with us about GringoVisas and, anything else that she has going on. So, Maite, I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit about GringoVisas and anything else that you want to talk about or plug or any other businesses that you're involved in or working with.
Oh, thank you. Well, GringoVisas has been doing nothing but visas for the last 7 years now. We have offices in Cuenca, Quito, Guayaquil, and some offices, not offices, but we have people that work for us in Loja and in Vilcabamba. So when we have clients from those areas, we can still take care of them. We have also the office in the U.S. I have a person that works there full-time. She's in charge of doing apostilles. So, for example, if somebody came in without a police report, without an FBI, we can take care of that without them having to go back to the U.S. And this person in Connecticut has been doing apostilles for the 50 states for the last 3 years now for me, working for me in Connecticut. And GringoVisas also has 3 attorneys in staff. So when you come to GringoVisas, you know that we're going to be there for you. And it's not one person to do the best they can. It's a team of people working for you. You can find us online, or you can always call me or email me if you have questions.
Very good. And just what is your website? It's gringovisas.com, is that correct?
GringoVisas.com. My US number is 203-648-4511. My Ecuadorian number is 0989-153622, but also info@gringovisas.com, an email.
Great. And I know, Darnell, I know you worked with Maite on a visa, and we've referred a couple of people to her. We've certainly had good experiences personally as well.
Yeah, absolutely. She was really instrumental with some of the documents that are difficult to get sometimes, and getting those apostilled, and getting criminal reports from the state. It's a regulation that was added prior to this one, I think back at the end of 2014. So these things are always changing, and it's always great to have access to expertise with people who do that every day. So very positive personal experience for sure.
Thank you so much, Darnell. It was a pleasure working with you. And if anybody likes to contact me, I'm always available. Thank you so much for having me, and enjoy your weekend. We'll see who's the new president next Monday.
All right, fingers crossed. Thank you so much for being here, Maite.
Thanks for joining.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, D, you want to shoot us out of here?
Yeah, we'll do. Once again, wanted to thank Maite for joining us on today's podcast. What are we at, number 28?
28, I believe, yep.
Man, we're getting pretty good at this.
We're media moguls is what we are.
You're a media mogul. I'm just the guy that shows up every once in a while and chimes in.
Yeah, I'm an aspiring media mogul, and you don't have a Facebook account. So don't ask me how that happened to me, by the way, because I was I was like the last guy in the world to have Facebook, and now I'm shooting like selfie YouTube videos, but how the times change. How the mighty have fallen, right? Exactly.
Well, good. Everyone, thanks for tuning in to this week's podcast. If you want to follow up on anything that we discussed here, anything that you find on the website, you can reach us toll-free from the U.S. and Canada at 888-999-0948. Reach us via email at info@abecuador.com, or check out any of our services, blogs, and in addition to being able to listen to this podcast on our website at www.abecuador.com. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll check in with you next week.